Kurokage is a purple armored total assault boss which challenges your ability to keep your team alive under constant pressure. You'll need continuous AoE healing when taking on this boss, because if you're unable to maintain your team's health, they'll turn against each other and give you a very difficult time. In this video, I will cover Kurokage's abilities, give general guidance on team building, and provide some tips and strategies to help ease your fight against him in-game. If you prefer reading text, I have document guides written by myself linked in the description of this video. Otherwise, welcome to SCHALE Raid Tactics. I'm Kozu, and thank you for coming. Firstly, Kurokage has a few passive effects and mechanics that you need to keep in mind at all times while fighting it. Kurokage's main mechanic is called Intimidation. Some of Kurokage's attacks will apply great health to your students, which reduces their max HP. If more than 50% of your students' max HP is grey, then they'll become confused and start attacking other members of your team. A confused student also cannot use any of their skills. You can remove Intimidation by healing your students, however, only a portion of the healing will actually remove it. On hard, only half your healing contributes to removing Intimidation, and this will go as low as 10% of healing effectiveness in higher difficulties. Just to clarify, only healing done on Intimidation is reduced. Healing regular missing HP will work as it normally would. Once the regular HP is healed, only the remaining heal values will be reduced for cleansing the Intimidation. When it comes to gameplay, this mechanic is the most important one. You have to make sure your team is constantly healthy, because not only are they unable to use their skills, but your students hurt. A lot. Like, a lot. DPS units deal way too much damage, and the chances of your team completely wiping when someone gets confused is really high. You will have to bring a healer with you to keep Intimidation low. Kurokage has another passive mechanic which you will need to utilize to deal proper damage. The boss is actually not the only enemy on the field. Surrounding it are 6 invisible soul fragments. These fragments don't do anything, but all damage dealt towards them will count towards Kurokage's total HP. So if a fragment takes 100 damage, Kurokage will also take 100 damage, even if you didn't attack the main body. The existence of these fragments mean that the best way to deal damage to Kurokage is to use AoE. You don't really have a choice in this matter because Kurokage has a lot of HP. Trying to kill him with single target damage won't work. Also, you'll need AoE defense debuffs. The boss and the souls have very high levels of defense, to the point where it negates almost 80% of your damage in higher difficulties. If you don't bring any defense debuffs, you're going to have a very slow time. Finally, Kurokage's last passive effect allows him to ignore shields. That's it, no strings attached, just don't bring a shielder. So these are Kurokage's passive effects. Each of these, the Intimidation, the Soul Fragments, the High Defense, and the Shield Ignore, are constant through all 3 phases of the fight. These things will form the basis of all your decisions, including your team building. Though we will come back to the team building later, because we firstly need to know what Kurokage actually does. Phase 1 starts on the surface. Kurokage is in a sealed state, and Groggy will not build during this phase. The boss is not really a threat. The scariest part of this phase are the eye portals Kurokage will summon frequently. They will spawn under any random student and then explode, inflicting 11% of max HP as Intimidation. These eyes are the main cause of Intimidation. If your students are hit by 5 of these in a row without any healing, they will get confused and attack your other team members. You can't really avoid them, but you can make it easier for yourself by spacing out your team so that they're not standing on top of each other and sharing the same puddle. Doing this will reduce the overall levels of Intimidation applied to your team and make it much easier for your healer to keep up. If you didn't know, the position of where your team stands is based on how you order them in the team select menu. If it looks like your team is sharing puddles, what you're going to have to do is back out and change the position of your team until you find an order that lets you avoid sharing puddles. Mind you, this is entirely optional. If your healer is strong enough, then it doesn't matter if your team is sharing a puddle because you can just heal it off. Sometimes it might be impossible for your team to avoid sharing a puddle, but if the strengths of the team outweigh the fact that you're eating more Intimidation, then it doesn't really matter. As usual, the answer is to practice. As long as your team stays above 50% health, then you could honestly get away with anything. Besides the puddles, Kurokage has a few simple attacks that it rotates through a fixed order. The first attack is the Quake. Kurokage will simply damage all students in an area surrounding the closest target. The second attack is Breath, where it will simply damage any student standing in the indicated areas. The last attack is the Fox Summons. These summons will run at the nearest student and explode to deal damage. If you are playing on Insane and above, the summons will also add Intimidation if you let them explode. Thankfully, if you kill these summons before they explode, then you will not take any damage nor Intimidation. Kurokage will repeat these attacks in a fixed order for the entirety of Phase 1. Quake, Breath, Summons. That's really all you need to know for Phase 1. For the most part, you can stick to a fairly simple loop. Apply defense down, deal damage, and heal. Just doing these 3 things on repeat will eventually get you to transition into Phase 2. Speaking of transitions, Kurokage's phase change works slightly differently compared to other bosses. Just like his peers, Kurokage will transition after reaching a specific threshold of HP. Phase 1 will end when Kurokage falls to 75% HP. Where this boss is different is how it becomes immune to all damage until the transition is complete. This window of immunity is very brief, and there isn't anything you can actually do about it. But it is something to keep in mind as you get closer to transition. After all, you wouldn't want to spend all your cost on setting up buffs and debuffs only for the boss to eat most of its damage with its immunity. It's okay to slow down a little bit as you approach Phase 2, because you're probably going to need all your cost anyway to survive it. Phase 2. Welcome to Hell. You may also see this phase referred to as the Shadow Realm, Kurokage's reality model, or its domain expansion. Everything Kurokage did in Phase 1, it still happens in Phase 2, but on top of that, he's gotten some power-ups which make this fight much more difficult. Firstly, the boss has a new passive. Every 6 seconds, all students will lose 5% of their HP to Intimidation. This stacks up fast. Passively, it will only take your team 1 minute to get confused even if they do not take any other attacks from Kurokage. In reality, you'll get confused much earlier because Kurokage's eye paddles are still happening. You have to be prepared for this. In Phase 1, the Intimidation can be slow enough that you only have to worry about 1 or 2 students at once. But while in the Shadow Realm, your whole team is under constant threat of confusion. You must have an AoE healer in this phase to keep your team healthy. You simply will not survive with single target healers. Kurokage now also has extra attacks. The first new attack is a rush attack where it will charge in a triangular shape around the map. Any students hit by this attack will be knocked around, usually towards the center. This attack deals regular HP damage and does not apply Intimidation. By itself, this isn't much of a damage threat. The real problem is how it knocks your entire team into the center of the map. It basically guarantees that all 4 members of your team are going to start sharing the same eye puddles for the rest of the fight. There's not much you can do to react to this attack, but it's going to make your healer start working overtime. The other new attack occurs when Kurokage's ATG is full. It will summon a black hole in the middle of the map which pulls your team towards it. The black hole will deal regular damage during the suction, and then it will explode to deal a burst of regular damage. After the explosion, a dot will apply to your team. This dot is a bit special because the damage scales based on how much Intimidation your team has. The more Intimidation you have, the more damage the dot deals. This dot will absolutely kill any unit with high Intimidation, even if they're not confused. Just like Kurokage's other attacks, you can't do anything to avoid it. You have no choice but to make your healer work really hard, not only after the attack to heal the damage dealt, but also before the attack to keep your Intimidation low. If you're not vigilant on your Intimidation, this attack will absolutely wipe you. Now, all of this sounds scary, because it is. Kurokage has a lot of kill pressure during this phase, and any weaker team will absolutely just fall and die. But it's not entirely doom and gloom. There is an extra and very important mechanic in Phase 2 that will make all the difference in allowing you to escape Kurokage's domain. This mechanic is the groggy gauge. Just like most other bosses, the yellow bar beneath Kurokage's HP will fill when you deal damage the boss is weak to. In this case, purple damage will fill the bar. When this bar is full, Kurokage will be completely disabled for 20 seconds. This so far is on par with what you would expect from other bosses, but Kurokage has 2 very unique properties when you trigger groggy. The first is the total amount of soul fragments will increase from 6 to 10. This by itself is a pretty big deal. If your students are already able to land their attacks on all the souls at the same time, having 4 more targets to hit is effectively a 66% damage increase. But that's not all. The second effect is equally, if not more important. all attacks during Groggy is guaranteed to crit. This, on top of having extra targets to hit, opens up a massive damage window. To take full advantage of it, you should, firstly, use your best units for this moment, and secondly, you should keep an eye on the Groggy bar so you know to save up all your costs to burst down the boss as hard as you can. If your debuffs last a long time, then you should probably set it up before Groggy. When it comes to buffs, crit damage buffs are especially powerful. Do not waste this opportunity. Kurokage will give you at most 2 chances at Groggy. If you are unable to push your damage properly during this window, you are going to have a very bad time because staying alive in Kurokage's reality model isn't easy. Your healer deserves a break, and you want to leave the Shadow Realm as soon as possible. With the right setup, it would not be unusual for a strong team to bust straight out of Phase 2 with Groggy. Use it well. As for the transition, Phase 2 ends when Kurokage reaches 10% health. Just like the transition from Phase 1, it will become immune to all damage after reaching this threshold, so be careful not to overspend. That said, don't be too careful. Prioritize leaving Phase 2 ASAP because you really wouldn't want to be stuck there. For Phase 3, you return to the surface and Kurokage goes back to its weakened state. The fight in Phase 3 is exactly the same as Phase 1. You will return to the slower, less frantic routine of healing and dealing damage. Intimidation is still a threat, of course, but it's something you should have gotten used to by now. At least there is no more constant aura, and the only intimidation threat is the portals. From this point on, you just need to persist a tiny bit longer until you finally kill the boss. That is all for Kurokage's mechanics. Phase 2 is where the real fight starts, so when you're trying to strategize your team for deployment, you should ensure that you're using the best units for that phase. Without the right setup, it is very easy to get stuck in Kurokage's domain expansion. So next up is a team building, which will hopefully give you an idea of which roles you will need to fill on your team. As Blue Archive gets older, the best and most recommended students to bring to a fight may change, but what will not change are the fundamental principles for building the team. In this section, I would advise paying attention to the roles you have to fill out on the team rather than the students themselves. With that said, throughout Kurokage, I will recommend to have on each team at the minimum 1 AoE, at least 1 defense debuff, at least 1 healer, and 1 tank. You will need at least 1 AoE on your team. These will be your damage dealers. Some units have naturally high crit stats. You will especially want these units for Phase 2 to take full advantage of Groggy. To enable your damage dealer's potential, you're going to need 1 AoE defense debuff. If you're doing this on Extreme and below, you could get away with not having a dedicated debuffer, especially if your damage dealers already have their own debuff. But if you can bring one, you totally should. It will make a world of difference on how efficiently you'll be able to get through the fight. An AoE healer is non-negotiable. Even if you're overleveled and doing weaker difficulties that you would normally crush with no effort, it is totally possible to still wipe to intimidation. Finally, you're going to need a tank to help absorb Kurokage's auto attacks and its frontline damage. Some tanks have multiple functions. If you're able to bring these units, you really should, as it gives you more room to fill the other important roles. They're not totally necessary though. If you don't have a multi-role tank, that's fine too. Just be careful not to neglect the other roles. The rest of the team can be filled with any support you see fit. Crit damage buffs are especially powerful in Phase 2. Try to include them on a team that will trigger Groggy. That's all for the team building. If you're approaching the high difficulties at recommended level, you're going to need more than just good teams. Strategizing and ensuring you're deploying your teams in the right order is also going to be important. You don't always want to be using your strongest team first in Phase 1 because you could run a very real risk of having no one to bust you out of Phase 2. Next up will be the strategies and some gameplay tips to help make this boss a bit easier to approach. Many players' first instinct is to use their strongest team first. This makes sense because if you can kill the boss with only one team, you would naturally try to do so. It'll save you time, save you effort, and probably save you resources because you don't need to make more than one team. But if your team isn't strong enough to go all the way to Phase 3 in one go, it is totally possible to get stuck in Phase 2. Unless you have a very wide roster and you have access to many AoE healers, defense debuffs, and DPS, chances are a second team is going to die without making much progress within Phase 2. Once you run out of AoE healers, it would be impossible to keep Intimidation low and you will constantly wipe. So if your strongest team cannot get to phase 3 in one go and you find yourself stuck in phase 2, then I strongly recommend using your weaker teams in phase 1 first. The requirements for phase 1 are far lower than phase 2. You can easily get away with running weaker units or a team without all the necessary roles filled out. I've actually prepared a different team building chart just to show you what a weak team on phase 1 could look like. Firstly, you don't need purple damage. Yellow and blue have an abundant amount of AoE units that can still hurt Kurokage quite a bit. Yellow and blue units also don't build any groggy, which is fine because Kurokage doesn't build groggy in phase 1 anyway. By doing this, you can save your purple units for phase 2 where groggy is really important. You could also totally get away with single target healers. Without an aura ticking away at your health, it is possible for good single target healers to keep up with Intimidation in phase 1. You might need to bring 2 healers though, if one isn't enough. Finally, if you have a very limited amount of defense debuffs, you're better off prioritizing them for phase 2. It's totally okay to leave them out of the phase 1 team. The idea behind this weaker phase 1 team is to help lower the boss's HP in an environment they can actually survive in. Once you've lowered the boss's health enough, or potentially gotten all the way to phase 2 with your weaker team, you can then use your stronger team afterwards. This way, your stronger team just might have enough damage to get themselves out of phase 2, and you wouldn't need to deploy any weak teams while still inside Kurokage's domain. Once you're in phase 3, you can go back to using weaker teams since phase 3 is identical to phase 1. Normally, Kurokage will always transition when falling below 10% health, even if it is already in groggy. But if you manage to trigger both the groggy and transition at the same time, it is possible to temporarily delay the transition until the groggy is over. You have 5 frames of error to make it happen. It's pretty easy to do on a unit with a single powerful hit, but it's almost impossible to do on a multi-hitting unit. If you succeed, you get to keep all the advantages of groggy past the point where you normally lose it. Because normally when you get to phase 3, the extra souls and the guaranteed crit will disappear. If your team is really strong, you could use this opportunity to deal fatal damage to Kurokage while still in phase 2. Do note that the boss can actually die in phase 2, so when it recovers from groggy, you'll be sent to phase 3 with the boss at 2 HP remaining. This is not something everyone will, or even can, pull off, but if it is available to you as an option, you should strongly consider it as it can cut out the need for you to play through phase 3. This concludes Kurokage Raid Guide. There were a lot of individual mechanics and attacks to cover in this video, but altogether you follow a pretty simple loop in actual gameplay. Heal, apply debuffs, do damage. As long as your health bar isn't half grey, you will most likely be alright, even if you didn't know what the boss is going to do next. At the same time though, the boss still puts enough pressure on your team that you can't just sleep through the raid. In my opinion, I think they did a pretty good job on providing a balanced boss design. It's not filled with randomness and crazy experimental concepts like Greg and Goz, but it's also not a beach vacation like Welcome or Hovercraft. With Kurokage, I think the devs have found a good middle spot in boss design. I'm glad they still have their heads together when it comes to making cool and fun enemies. I don't doubt there will be complaints amongst players anyway. Many people would probably have a serious lack of purple units. This is definitely a problem, but it's not a problem with the boss per se, but rather the content cycle. Even then, it's a problem that will most certainly solve itself over time. Just like how at the game's release there was next to no blue units, over the game's lifespan we now have so much more. We will reach that point with purple units eventually. Until then, I hope you're able to enjoy the boss for what it is. A simple but still challenging experience. Good luck and have fun.